Dante's Inferno paints a very beautiful depiction of hell, if we can call it that. The several circles of hell that moves through the various deadly sins and describes the appropriate punishment attributed to each and every one of these. Now, those of us that have practiced the path understand that hell is very, very different than the mad ravings of old Christian theologians trying to demonize anything that doesn't think the way they do. And I mean, let's be honest, it also still does lead to very great video games and fantastic films, so I'm not complaining. It also makes our conversations a bit more interesting now, doesn't it? But hell is something that we will go through, whether it is in a personal capacity or through a spiritual capacity if we choose to enter the Cvlt path. Today, I want to give you a guidebook through hell. Whether you're going through this emotionally in a spiritual fashion, this will be a useful set of information, ideas, and principles for you. Or whether you are someone who has suffered from the Cvlt sickness, explored some of the dark Cvlt and tunnels of Set, and perhaps not have done so with the appropriate development, and found yourself in the death current or caught up with the Cvlt flu, if you will, the energy that is so difficult to shake, then I think today's discussion will help you through that. After all, when going through hell, you might as well ask the devil for the way. I enjoyed that little dramatic intro of the devil in hell, but however satirical or playful the notion is, the experience of it is not as fun. And I think it's essential that we understand a couple of core principles of the left-hand path that helps us to understand this, helps us to understand how to progress through this, because there's a very different experience. One of the fundamental differences, for me at least, between left hand and right hand is the one supplicates on its knees begging for mercy. The other one is almost turned on by the torture. Doesn't run away from it, doesn't cower from it, doesn't try to move the responsibility of someone else, doesn't pray for escape, but accepts it and does their absolute best with it, embraces it. It is a difference between the hunter and the hunted in many terms. So I think these ideas and these psychologies that we find in the left-hand path are essentially useful as a very different paradigm by which we should approach the darkness of life as well as the experience of our pain. Now, I'm speaking today specifically from the path of a practitioner of the dark arts who has gone through Cvlt initiations. And I'm speaking very often to those who have themselves dabbled in the dark arts and inadvertently opened up some of these darker components. Now, I myself have seen practitioners of many years that opened some of the shells and ended themselves in terrible depressions, painful ordeals of life, and were unable to navigate their way out of it. Predominantly is because they couldn't adopt to these different archetypes, these different symbolic representations, because they've come from religious trauma, where any of these symbolic archetypes that I will be speaking about today are considered taboo, wrong, and from our delicious devil. The truth of the matter is, however, that this paradigm is as primitive as the caveman. The fact is, we have evolved in so many different areas And this does no more than hinder our progress as a species. Many have already passed through these gates, and there's much for us to learn. I think the symbolism of the magical current really describes this to us as a beautiful map. The first and the most common one that we see when we look over to the dark path is that of the moon and the shadow side of the moon and all these different beautiful, more nocturnal creatures that are representative of this. Some of the ones that come to mind quite obviously is the haunting specter, the classic zombie, the terrifying werewolf, and the powerful vampire, as well as the great necromancer. But these are exceptionally useful maps when understood comprehensively from the left-hand path perspective. If we strip away from the Hollywood quality interpretation of these things, and instead we look at them from a deeper perspective, we can see the other side of it start to reveal itself with more beauty, clarity, within the darkness. In the works of author Michael Donald Craig in his classic Modern Magic, a great example of this persists. In his correspondence systems and translations in that work, a classic for most occultists, he describes two specific archetypes in contradiction to each other, the Archangel Metatron and the Archangel Samael, and translates the names as he who is inside of the presence and he who is outside of the presence, essentially describing many of these, shall we say, angelic and even demonic principles as stages of human experience and development through the ladder of lights known as the Kabbalah, or the Tree of Life. As such, we find a very beautiful representation of these specific archetypes when we look at the shadow side of the tree. When we look at the Klipa of Lilith, Gamaliel, Samael, and Rabzar. These essential bottom aspects, including the downward facing triangle and the entrance to the black tree, says a lot or provides a lot of interesting insight that allows us to not try and escape from the hellfire that is present inside of our experience, but instead teaches us how to transform it and become purified or empowered even to build the draconian body or build a deeper inner structure that is more matured in our self-acceptance. There's a fundamental first stage that occurs inside of this process, and we can refer to it as the initiation or the Great Death. The Great Death or the initiation can happen in several ways to you. It can be the result of actual initiation into a recognized temple, but at the same time, it can also simply be the result of tragedy in life, or the inadvertent working with forces that you didn't perhaps fully understand at the time. During this process, a death begins to occur, and by death I do not mean a physical death, but instead a psychological one. The modes or signals of pain and pleasure, your original value system, gets shifted. When the original value system gets shifted inside of the individual, the concept of self dissolves. What used to make up this thing called you no longer motivates this thing to you, and this thing called you starts to pretty much fragment, break apart, fall away, it dies. But this is a very difficult transition for people because it's not what you expect. It's not as dramatic as it is in cinematic films or video games. It is in fact a slow, gradual discovery of your death. It can take some people months to realize the space that they find themselves in. It may be quicker. It depends on the individual and their understanding of the process. But there is a stage which is almost a stage that seems to be undefined. There's no specific compass in it. Time and space seem to blur over one another, as if you are no longer in a standard state of consciousness. This is a very specific quality that we find in people that exhibit various signs of depression, anxiety, and many other classic, what many would refer to as mental illnesses. Now, I am at no point trying to give a diagnosis of mental illnesses. I'm specifically speaking again as a practitioner of the occult arts and the reflection or similarities on these. So please, by all means, don't take my word as final law. See a licensed professional in the area that you need help with when you do. That being said, though, What happens inside of the undifferentiated space of death is that the old self goes away. We see the same reflection in the classic banishing ritual of the hexagram. The classic formula of light, L, V, X, Lux, the symbolism of Osiris slain, the morning of Isis, Apophis and Typhon, Osiris risen, the entire journey of the discovery or the birth of Horus and the avenging of his father speaks to the exact same process within ourselves, alchemically, that has to take place. There is a certain life or a version of self or a version of reality that dies. Osiris does get slain. There's the death that happens in the initiate. In fact, in most traditions, the death gate represents the doorway into a tradition, very much so. It is also the symbolic ending of a chapter, a stage, a life, a who you were completely. Even in the Christian Gnostic view, there is when you see God, you are no more. This death is fundamentally unavoidable. It's represented in various initiatory systems in many different stages. But the death in itself is not a complete clean cut, as much as we would like it to be. The reason is you're still immersed inside of Maya. You're still immersed inside of the illusion. For some, the dramatic experience of it can be profound. They can go through a psychedelic plant journey and have that experience, but same as going to Burning Man after you're back for the first month of still trying to keep the ethos. Very shortly and very soon, society starts to peel back in and you find your old road rage coming back. The process of death is more of a process of disassociation from one version of self or reality and the systemic association to a new one. And if the process alchemically is not completed, you become a zombie.
Zombies? Zombies aren't real.
The zombie, which is the first kind of symbolism here, are the ones that are usually outside of the gate. They're not really in the tree of death yet. They're the, shall we say, remnants of the undead that remain there. And this is really that stage for me. The zombie is very classically seen in most of our culture. There's books and material out there talking about the problem in pornography, social media, and other dopamine-inducing things.
Start dopamine. Yeah.
That make people distract themselves and receive some type of chemical kick without actually doing the work. As a result, destroying their motivation and their will or capacity or even potency. As such, the zombie stage is the last part of the kill. It's the last part of the, shall we say, harikiri of your own spiritual ascent. It is the part where you have to give up that need to be seen, so to speak. The zombie, I think the attributed symbology that comes to it is very appropriate because we have the classic undead seeking brains to eat or consume. Now, obviously, there's lots more fan fiction around this, but the general gist of it is it's something that's longing for a life that it had and it's consuming brains, and in this case, ideas. We see this with everyone that's constantly hopping on new trends and trying to get on the For You page. We see the death of art. Sure, we're coming up with better ways to edit and nicer ways to predict human behavior, but we're disconnecting from the unconscious's creative ability to produce art and as such, magic in the first place. I mean, art is magic, after all. Form follows function, and life imitates art. These are classic principles and ideas, and we're not creating art. This dies for most people because many have experienced the type of death in their own life. They don't know how to reintegrate into this world, hence they find themselves as zombies. As such, for you to progress inside of your path and your journey through hell is to accomplish the next stage, to let the death complete.
Let's see, killing zombies.
With dopamine regulation and...
To let the death complete is to become a ghost. Right, to leave the dead old body behind, let the zombie rot in the grave as you become a specter haunting the night.
I see dead people.
Catch of being the specter that haunts the night, it's not very romantic. There's no one there to acknowledge the beauty of your turmoil or the pain that you've been through. Oh, how pretty is your suffering. There's no one there to acknowledge all of these wonderful things. There's not supposed to be. The point of the ghost stage is the point where you disconnect from needing to be seen, heard, all these things from an external point of view. In other words, It is the moment you stop looking outside of yourself for validation. It's the moment that you stop taking the pressures that are within you, this hellfire, if you will, that's busy formulating and strengthening you, as hormesis does. And you, instead of seeking release, whether that release is in the form of food, a personal favorite, drink, pornography, social media, or whatever the dopamine kick is, which is the behavior of the zombie, the unbearableness of the weight of death while still alive or still longing for the old, you surrender all of that. You stop trying to post just to be on time, and you start creating content or a business or a world that is your own unique thing that hasn't anything to do with anybody else, and it doesn't matter if they see you, acknowledge you, or anything. Because the ghost now needs to try and reanimate in the world, and at first it tries to reach to the cup, and it can't do it. Nothing happens, it passes right through it. This is very much what you feel like in that stage. You feel like you're unseen. You feel like nothing matters, like you're no longer relevant, and it's simply because the old world, the old definition, that old map is no longer relevant. It's died, it's gone. You have to complete the death. And as long as you're holding on to it, the longer you will suffer in that limbo purgatorial state. And now you must progress because there's a long journey through. These are only simply the scratching points. It's time to get on with it. The moment the spirit is able to move the cup is the moment the spirit realizes the process or the art by which it starts to matter. This is what you need to do. It is the moment when you start to realize that the dreams, goals, hopes, visions that have been in your core, in your spirit for ages, and maybe even revealed now that you're no longer holding a filter on it, they matter. And you are responsible for making them matter. The agony of being unseen is the very power to drive you to enforce and break through the last remaining rules that prevent you from doing what it takes to take or go for the life you really want. It is through this process that you begin to realize you matter. Your opinions, your thoughts, your ideas, you matter, or you're able to matter, that we start to shift in. You see, the ghost can very much be seen as the Klippa of Nama. In that journey or that space within Nama, it is very much the haunting spirit of the world. It is what we seek in the world. It's why it's the essence behind money and power and status and all of these things. These fundamental things may not drive you at that point, but you are required to matter to integrate into the material world. And this psychological death of judgment and thinking is very much the tunnel that leads out to Samael. In Samael, we have the Necromancer.
Good day, I'm Bob the Necromancer, and today we're doing an unboxing.
And the first words of the Necromancer that really resonated with me the most was from Dr. Thomas Carlson in his classic Diary of a Necromancer, one I still made a quote of and put out on the web, and that is that the first act of the Necromancer is to resurrect themselves from the dead. You see, once you accept the fact that you go beyond what some other YouTubers and self-help authors have referred to as monk mode, the time period where you disconnect from society, you don't go to parties, you just focus on doing the work. You go even further into what we can call ghost mode. You become a ghost. You don't care about anything else but doing what it needs to make sure this vision in you actually matters. You make it matter, you make it real, you make it manifest. You're not going to feel like it. You're not going to want to go to the gym. You're not going to want to get up in the morning because you're not suddenly in some happy, realized place. You're going to have to summon forth the greatest tools of the Magi, will and imagination, because you're not going to see the world you want to create. You're going to have to create it in your imagination until it becomes more real than the world that you are in, and you're going to have to will yourself into existence to do the things. It's not about positive motivation, it is about discipline. It's about the will to power really and truly embraced. It is the taking charge of your direction in life instead of waiting for God or Spirit or some other thing to deliver it unto you. It is taking full control, and this is what's meant by becoming a God and not supplicating to the God. The old classic no gods, no monsters mentality, where I neither fear the judgment or seek the salvation of some other entity or force, but take absolute and total responsibility and ownership of my experience. This is the way to resurrect thyself from the dead, to resurrect yourself from what you've been through, to stop feeling sorry for yourself in the zombie stage, to accept your fate in the ghost stage, and then to begin to actively will yourself, to force yourself to go through the motions even though you don't want to bring yourself to the next stage. This then gives us the two other klippa that are also available in this rung of the tree. That is that of Gamaliel, oftentimes represented by our beloved Lilith, the moon herself in her blood that speaks quite literally to the blood. The biology, the actual blood, the hormones that are flowing through your body, the chemistry in your body, this all biologically starts to change. Once you begin to truly move in this direction, a new will to live starts to emerge. The vampire is born inside of you.
There's a vampire sent to drain.
The vampire is the nocturnal consumer of blood. It's thriving on life force. In other words, this is where you become excited and even energetically aroused towards the purpose and the vision that you see. You become brutal and beautiful. You start to recognize what so many of the teachings and ideas around vampirism that I've shared on the show are, which is the exchange of the currency of value, the understanding of the status game that is behind most of our decisions as human beings. Many of us, and all of us really, are driven by status. There are examples of people in prisons who, in a prison, has the status, even if it is not the most desirable status, but they would rather have that status in the prison than leave the prison to be free men or women, where the truth is they'll just be nothing more than ex-cons. A complete loss of status. This loss of status we have gone to wars for. In this point of the magician's development, you accept the status drive. You accept that it is a currency in society, and you start to consciously use it. This is why the vampire is influence in and of itself. It hypnotically charges and influences its patrons, its devotees, and builds its coven, if you will. There is naturally a sexual undertone with the vampiric nature. Beauty, attraction are all part of its quality. This is because pleasure is then reassociated to the experience and these different desires of the self, which at one point was considered dark. These other parts that you shouldn't love or shouldn't like or shouldn't accept about yourself has died. And now I accept myself in totality. It doesn't mean I leave it there, because the nature of the vampire and the difference between a high-born vampire, so to speak, and a classic low-class archetype.
One of the best ways to drain people's energy nowadays is via the internet. This woman is an astrophysicist. Actually, this is not how space works. Read a book. The energy you get this way isn't quite as pure, but if you do enough of it, it'll fill you up.
Is the quality of the hunt. The one truly seeks the best quality energy. In other words, what happens at this stage is you raise the standard far beyond what it was before. And when you hold yourself to a higher standard, more things happen. The reason for the money level that you're currently earning is because of the standard that you're willing to tolerate. You see, many think that you go into this and you become more tolerant of pain and suffering. No, you probably become less. You can handle it, but you're unwilling to accept less. Your standards raise. You can endure pain and suffering because you see its benefit, but you don't suffer it needlessly. You don't suffer without purpose. You don't somehow make noble the suffering. You are just able to understand it as a necessary step in becoming stronger, and you utilize hormesis. Oftentimes, the difference between a wealthy person and an unwealthy person is the one is unwilling to endure the loss. They have an easier time becoming uncomfortable, an easier time becoming intolerant of that state, so that they have no choice but to rise above it. Once these stages are there, we move into the werewolf.
A werewolf.
The werewolf being the last of these stages, at least at this level of the developmental journey through our hell. The werewolf has no control over the transformation at first. The moon, which we now know has been an underlining connecting factor behind all of these aspects, which in its same way can lead to lunacy or the lunatic, the various forms of madness reflected inside of the other aspects of this journey.
I'm a werewolf.
Is also the subconscious mind. It is the ravages of the unconscious. That is why the Gamaliel Klipa also deeply embodies the nature of dreams and sexuality, all these unconscious components within ourselves. This is the point where the two overlap in deep respects. It is where you're no longer consciously trying to convince yourself of this, but your body starts to transform. Your body starts to take over. The two parts begin to work together. And yeah, at first it only happens on full moons, spontaneously on certain occasions, when a new habit is now installed in the clear system. But with more progress, as the classic myth of the lycanthrope are, there is a symbolic stage or a progressive stage by which the wolf can be transformed in at any time. The wolf, the beast, also has deeper symbolism. It is what Robert Bly would refer to in Iron John as the wild man or wild woman, if you will. It is now here where we start to recognize our progression up into Targaryen, the Black Sun. The Black Sun represents the component where God and beast unite. You understand portions of the beast now. Obviously, there's more to the notion. We also see this well depicted in the symbolism of the Sphinx. The head of a man on the body of an animal. Now that the animal beast is in alignment, and the god can now come into alignment. This is as simple as understanding the unification of the id and the superego, finding themselves into merger, the higher over moral or social parasite to some degree, and the wild animalistic side now moving into a new structure of expression that is unique to the sorcerer's original version of reality. Now, let me be clear, I do not perceive that as being a sudden manifestation of infinite worlds. There is views, perceptions, and discussions that higher up in the tree of death, something like this does occur. But that's not the point of our discussion. It's not what I'm debating. What the fact is, or what the psychology or the symbolism is at this time, this is when the adept begins to live true. You have broken free from the mold. You have completed the death and the resurrection, so to speak, in the dark version of the path. And you can clearly see the correspondence and crossovers of this between all of the different systems. And that is because there is no one unique secret way. Each and every single path holds a component of the light we seek, as is the saying in the old classic Golden Dawn ceremonies itself. We seek what works. We are occult scientists. We're not religious fanatics. And if we had to become completely biased to a certain point of view, we have lost the essence of what we stand for. I hope these ideas or these concepts give you a few metaphors, a few archetypal representatives that describes the path, because for the most of it, that is truly what the Tree of Death offers. And a lot of the mythology around demonology, language, if you will, same as the practices of Chod in the tantric cultures and many other systems, they offer a system of interpretation to reinterpret the meaning of the events that produces a different result. And if we explore the work of Viktor Frankl, who the developer or creator of logotherapy, who was working through the concentration camps at the time during one of the most horrific periods of the Jewish history, where people were laying on the bodies of their dead relatives, and he asked, What was the difference between those who immediately shriveled up and died, and those who themselves seemed to become stronger despite of the same situation and circumstances? And the answer was simple. The difference was one of meaning. Some interpreted this as the worst thing that could possibly happen to them, and how could God do this? And as such, their body responded accordingly. Others said that they are born to survive and overcome this so they can ensure it never happens. And they did. The meaning is the thing that differentiated the fallen from the ones that overcome. Magic is the science of meaning making. And not to oversimplify that, because there is a lot of evidence behind how meaning changes biochemistry and shifts consciousness itself and the effects that consciousness has on reality. This is indeed a butterfly effect from such a simple principle. But you cannot master ceremonial or ritual magic if you cannot master meaning making. I hope these ideas have helped you to introduce new meaning in your suffering and the stages to get you through it. So what was once hellfire now becomes the very fire from which you build the armor, the weapons, and the tools. A classic quote from one of my favorite films, Sucker Punch.
You have all the weapons you need. Now fight.
You have the weapons. Now fight. I'm Adam Nox, and remember to live deliciously.